Moms microdosing on shrooms. Never have I thought we'd ever be here. But yet, here we are. Recently, I came upon a pretty interesting ABC News article where this mom talks about how microdosing makes her a more present parent. Now, this idea of microdosing isn't new by any means. There have been a few reports of various benefits, including improved mood, enhanced creativity, increased focus, and reduce depression and anxiety after taking psilocybin. And some might wag a finger at the moms who decide to do this, but there have been even larger studies done on the effects of psychedelics and what it can do for your mental health. Positive effects. In fact, one study by Johns Hopkins University found that participants who took psilocybin in a controlled setting reported significant improvements in mood, well-being, and life satisfaction for up to 6 months after a single psilocybin session. And these effects were attributed to the drug's ability to induce mystical or profound spiritual experiences. And this is something I've noticed where before, like modern times, if you had brought up the idea of psychedelics, people would probably look at you like you were a creepy drug addict. But in the modern era, psychedelics have been gaining a lot of traction lately, mainly for the positive and lasting effects therapeutically. However, sidestepping from microdosing moms, what's even more interesting to me is the effect psychedelics have had on design. So often we see these patterns in psychedelic art with swirls, geometric shaping, and surrealist undertones. Why this? Why this style? Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that this imaging goes far beyond our current understanding of reality. There was this Washington Post article I saw recently where the title was literally, "Psychedelic mushrooms put your brain in a waking dream, study finds." And goes on to explain further in the article that the mushroom compounds could be unlocking brain states usually only experienced when we dream, changes in activity that could help unlock permanent shifts in perspective. In the study cited, 15 participants who were administered psilocybin were found to have increased brain function in areas associated with emotion and memory. And this effect is very similar to the brain in dream sleep, as Dr. Robin Carhart-Harris, who is a postdoctoral researcher at Imperial College London and co-author of the study, puts it. "You're seeing these areas getting louder and more active," he said. "It's like someone's turned up the volume there, in these regions that are considered part of an emotional system in the brain. When you look at the brain during dream sleep, you see the same hyperactive emotion centers." Now, this doesn't exactly surprise me, as anyone who has watched my previous videos knows, I talk a lot about the famous psychologist Carl Jung and his work on dreams and archetypes. It was hypothesized by him that dreams do have meaning, and the meaning can be extrapolated by deciphering what the archetypes represent. Similarly, many who take psilocybin report a much stronger reaction as the subconscious becomes conscious. It can be scary. It can be wonderful. It depends entirely on the person. So we might see these surrealist undertones in psychedelic trips because tripping is akin to dreaming in a lot of ways. But what are these common features seen in psychedelic trips, and how does it relate to design? Well, one interesting common element seen are fractals. I covered fractals a little bit in my last video, which you can watch here if you're interested. But fractals are pretty much a pattern that repeats forever, and every part of the fractal, regardless of how zoomed in or zoomed out you are, looks very similar to the whole image. Fractals are commonly seen in nature and traditional architecture. These are mathematical patterns, and they are even used sometimes in video game design to create realistic and varied terrain in games, especially for large open world environments. By using fractal algorithms, developers can create terrain that appears very natural and diverse, with features such as mountains, valleys, and coastlines. It's not entirely understood yet why fractals are so commonly seen during trips, but it's understood that psilocybin often makes the experiencer feel more connected to nature, which is essentially a fractal. And some have hypothesized that the fractals seen during psychedelic trips are the real reality, and the universe would be more like a hologram made up of mathematical structures, but we just can't see them. Sort of like code. Though this idea doesn't have a lot of research to support it yet, quite a few physicists and even Stephen Hawking have been toying with the idea of a holographic universe. It's interesting to think about. Either way, it's also interesting to note the effect psychedelic visuals have had on design. Take for instance corporate hippie design. Corporate hippie was spawned from the hippie movement, which was huge around the late 60s to early 70s. It wasn't until 1968 that hippie-inspired fashion and music became more popular in the mainstream. Corporations aimed to appeal to the public by incorporating psychedelic visuals, which gave rise to the corporate hippie.
From General Foods, freeze-dried or ground.
Yes, your head will tell you difference, 'cause the caffeine's gone away.
However, this clashed with the hippie subculture's anti-establishment ethos. Corporate hippie mainly attracted ordinary people adopting hippie style without fully embracing the subculture, just as it is with the current goth resurgence. There's a lot of curved lines, bright and contrasting colors, and bubble forms. However, there's a slight lack of the use of fractals. In the late 80s to early 90s, there is a resurgence of this style, which became known as Cyberdelia. Now, this aesthetic was known for its visual elements like kaleidoscopic palettes, acid colors, fractal forms, and expressive early 3D typography. It was commonly seen on early rave flyers and media associated with 80s to early 90s emerging cyberculture. And in this design, fractals seem to play a much more dominant role. Timothy Leary, known for promoting psychedelic drug use in the 1960s,
"We tell young people today, drop out of school, because school's education today is the worst narcotic drug of all. Don't politic, don't vote. These are old men's games."
Later became a leading figure in the cyberdelia counterculture of the 1980s. Referred to as cyberpunks, they enthusiastically embraced technology, with Leary advocating for personal computers, the internet, and virtual reality. He likened PCs to LSD and encouraged others to embrace technology with slogans like "Turn on, boot up, jack in." Unlike some 1960s hippies who distrusted science and technology, cyberpunks believed in their potential to transcend limits and authority.
When he grows up, in fact, if we wanted to wait for the year 2001, he said he will have in his own house, not a computer as big as this, but at least a console to which he can talk to his friendly local computer and get all the information he needs for his everyday life.
Often expressing themselves through cyber art and reality hacking. And if you don't know what reality hacking is, it's very similar to the current trend of raising awareness or consciousness or manifestation, law of attraction, whatever you want to call it. Now with Cyberdelia, it's much easier to create these psychedelic designs because computers can now be used to make them instead of human hands. And as you might know, it's much easier to create a never-ending pattern through automatic means. Fractals are much easier to create this way. Cyberdelia came to a crash after the dot-com bubble, and by 2000, the techno-utopian ideals of the cyberdelic counterculture were fading as fast as techno-realism gained traction. Many cyberpunks came to realize that technologies like PCs and the internet didn't bring about the radical societal changes they had hoped for, including the vision of a cyber society. This envisioned society characterized by computer literacy, intelligence, open-mindedness, and skepticism towards authority failed to materialize as anticipated. But I don't think we're finished here. As this realization hit, the cyberpunk subculture faded. But there was a new resurgence of the psychedelic idealism in the mid-2010s with Boho Chic, as Kari puts it. Early mid-2010s Tumblr hipster aesthetic. Triangles, geometric line motifs, mandalas, condensed handwritten block type, watercolors, Native American cultural appropriation, washed out colors, faux analog Instagram filtered imagery, galaxies, tapestries, and oneness/spiritual themes. You could describe this one as simply hipster, which does encapsulate a lot of the feel, but it's a very particular type of hipster. Native American themes play a major role in this, and spiritualism. When I think of boho chic, I think of dream catchers, fedoras, and Aztec print. And of course, galaxy print was pretty big too. Now, this style too has fallen out of fashion, but it makes me wonder what's next for idealism in design and the hope for a utopian society. Maybe something to do with environmentalism or a back to nature aesthetic of some sort. I don't know. I guess we'll have to see in the world of spiritual capitalism.